Okay, so you've really thrown us a fascinating challenge with this one,
Yeah.
a deep dive into sustainability certifications and the future of textile sustainability.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's 2025. It feels like every day there's a new eco label popping up
It really does.
and trying to make sense of it all. Well, frankly, it's a bit overwhelming.
I can see that.
So we've got this mountain of material that you've sent over, articles, reports, your own notes scribbled in the margins, and it seems like you're really trying to cut through the noise.
That's it, exactly.
Figure out what truly matters when it comes to these certifications, how to make informed choices about what you buy.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what we're going to try to do today.
Yeah, let's unpack it all.
So what have we got? It looks like reviews of various certifications, some really in-depth reports on new fabric innovations, the whole LCA thing, life cycle assessment, and then perspectives from some pretty big names in the sustainability world like Unity and good on you.
Yeah, some really interesting stuff in there.
So where do we even begin? I mean, just glancing at the best sustainability certifications and eco labels 2025, the Sustainable Agency article,
Right.
it's clear that there's a ton of certifications out there,
Oh, a dizzying number.
more than anyone could possibly keep track of.
And they make a great point right at the beginning.
Yeah.
No single certification can cover every single aspect of sustainability perfectly.
That was my first takeaway as well.
It's just not possible.
It's almost like they're trying to provide an antidote to greenwashing, you know?
Yeah, they even call out the bullshit, as they put it.
Right. They just come right out and say it.
Straightforward, no-nonsense approach.
Yeah. So how do they even attempt to make sense of this whole landscape?
Well, they break down the certifications into categories like better textiles, biodiversity, animal welfare, which helps get a handle on it, at least initially.
Okay, so a framework, sort of a way to categorize them.
Exactly. It's a good starting point.
Okay, so let's talk better textiles then.
All right, let's dive in.
Because I know two names that pop up constantly are Ecotex and GOTS, the Global Organic Textile Standard.
Yeah, those are two big ones.
So let's start with Ecotex. What's their main focus?
Basically, Okotex, especially their most well-known standard 100, they're all about testing the final product, the textile itself, to make sure it's free from harmful substances.
Okay, so they're looking at the finished product, not necessarily the whole process of getting there?
Exactly. They're testing for over 100 different chemicals that could be harmful to people or the environment.
That makes sense. But then the article also pointed out that Okotex doesn't necessarily delve into the sourcing of raw materials?
Right.
Or whether there was child labor involved or anything like that.
Yeah, it's not a complete picture of the supply chain.
Not in all cases, at least. They mentioned Made in Green as being less strict in some of those areas.
True. Made in Green does include some additional social and environmental criteria, but it's not as comprehensive as, say, GOTS.
Right, so it's important to remember that just because a product has an Okotex label,
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean it's a perfectly sustainable product.
It's a good indicator of chemical safety, but
Oh.
not the whole story.
Got it. So, good to know about the chemical testing, but it's not the only thing to consider.
Absolutely. You got to look beyond the label.
Now, what about Go OTS? This one seemed to be positioned as a really comprehensive standard for organic textiles, at least.
Yeah, GOTS is definitely the gold standard when it comes to organic.
Okay.
To even get a GOTS label, a product has to contain at least 70% certified organic fibers.
So that's a pretty high bar right there.
It is. And their even stricter organic label requires a minimum of 95%.
Oh, wow.
But what really sets GOTS apart is that it looks at the whole supply chain, from how those organic fibers are grown and harvested,
Huh?
all the way to the manufacturing processes and even the working conditions in the factories.
So they're covering everything from farm to fashion, basically.
Exactly. They have strict rules about the chemicals that can be used, waste and water management, even social criteria like fair wages and working hours.
It's like they're trying to address all the major sustainability concerns in one go.
They really are.
And the Sustainable Agency article called it out as being a really tough certification to achieve, which is encouraging, I think.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
GOTS is recognized internationally as a truly rigorous standard.
Okay, so while Okotex focuses on the final product, GuyOTS takes a broader farm-to-fashion approach, but specifically for organic materials.
That's a good way to summarize it.
Okay, what about wool? We saw the Responsible Wool Standard, or RWS, mentioned a few times. What's their deal?
RWS is all about animal welfare and responsible land management in wool production.
Okay.
So it's about ensuring that the wool you buy is coming from farms that treat their sheep well and manage their land sustainably.
So they're tackling a very specific ethical issue within the textile industry.
Exactly. They look at things like animal handling, nutrition, shearing practices, grazing methods, making sure the sheep are well cared for.
So if you're concerned about animal welfare when it comes to wool, RWS is the label to look for.
Yeah, it's a good indicator.
Now, the Better Cotton Initiative, BCI,
Right.
this one seemed to be a bit more controversial, at least according to the Sustainable Agency.
It is. There's definitely a lot of debate around BCI.
So what's the goal of BCI?
Well, they aim to improve practices in cotton farming globally, basically trying to make conventional cotton production less harmful to the environment and the people involved.
Okay, that sounds good in theory, but what are the criticisms?
The main issue is that BCI still allows for the use of GMO cotton and non-organic cotton.
Ah, so it's not necessarily organic cotton that they're promoting.
No. And there are also some very serious allegations of forced labor in some of the major cotton-producing regions like China, which is troubling.
Yeah, that's a major red flag. And the fact that many fast fashion brands, which don't exactly have the best sustainability track record, are members of BCI,
Right.
that adds to the skepticism, I think.
Absolutely. It raises questions about how effective BCI really is at driving meaningful change.
So another reminder that a label doesn't always tell the whole story.
Definitely. You got to do your research.
All right, let's move beyond textiles for a bit. There were so many other certifications listed, and upcycled certified caught my eye.
Upcycling is definitely having a moment.
Yeah, and it seems like a pretty straightforward concept.
It is. Basically, it means using ingredients or materials that would have otherwise been wasted and turning them into something new and valuable.
So reducing waste by finding creative ways to repurpose things.
Exactly.
And the upcycled certified label is specifically for food products, right?
That's right. It's administered by the Upcycled Food Association, and it's the only third-party certification specifically for upcycled food.
Interesting. So if you see that label, you know that the product is made with ingredients that were diverted from becoming waste,
Precisely.
which is a pretty awesome way to think about sustainability, I think.
Absolutely. It's all about closing the loop.
Okay, what about the Global Recycled Standard, or GRS? What does that one cover?
GRS is all about verifying recycled content.
Okay.
So for a product to get a GRS label, it has to contain a certain percentage of recycled materials,
How much?
at least 20% for business-to-business applications, and at least 50% for consumer products.
Okay, so there are different thresholds depending on who the product is intended for.
Right. But GRS goes beyond just the recycled content itself.
How so?
They also look at the supply chain of those recycled materials, the environmental and social practices involved in the recycling process, and they even look at the chemical content of the final product.
So it's about ensuring that the recycling process itself is also sustainable?
Exactly. They're trying to create a system where recycling is done responsibly from start to finish.
Okay, now we saw USDA Organic and the Soil Association mentioned as well.
Yeah, those are big names in organic certification.
And not just for textiles, right?
No, they cover a wide range of products,
Okay.
from food and cosmetics to even textiles.
So what are the key differences between USDA Organic and the Soil Association?
Well, USDA Organic is specific to the U.S.,
Okay.
while the Soil Association is based in the U.K., but they certify products globally.
Got it. And in terms of their standards?
The Soil Association is known for having even stricter standards than the EU organic regulations.
So they set a really high bar for organic certification.
They do.
Now, what about certifications that address climate change directly? I know the climate label was mentioned.
Ah, yes. The
No.
climate label is a new one, actually. It's replacing the climate neutral certified label.
Oh, interesting. So what's the difference?
Well, the old climate neutral certified label was mostly about achieving carbon neutrality, often through offsetting.
Right.
But the climate label goes further.
How so?
It requires companies to actually implement an internal carbon fee.
An internal carbon fee.
Yeah, basically they have to put a price on their own carbon emissions.
And what do they do with that money?
They use it to invest in projects that actively reduce carbon emissions.
Ah, so it's not just about compensating for emissions. It's about actually reducing them in the first place.
Exactly. It's a more proactive approach to climate action.
And the thinking is that this will incentivize companies to lower their emissions.
That's the idea. Make it more financially beneficial to be sustainable.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, another one that stood out was Regenerative Organic Certified, or ROC.
ROC is a really interesting one.
What makes it so special?
Well, it goes beyond just organic. It takes a much more holistic approach to agriculture.
How so?
It focuses on three key pillars: soil health, animal welfare, and fairness for farm workers.
So it's about regenerating the entire agricultural ecosystem, basically.
Exactly. It's about creating a system that's beneficial for the environment, the animals, and the people involved.
It seems like a really ambitious standard.
It is, but more and more brands are getting on board.
Now let's talk about fairness in the supply chain. We saw fair trade and fair for life mentioned, among others.
Yeah, those are some of the most well-known fair trade certifications.
So what's their main focus?
Their primary goal is to make sure that producers and workers, especially in developing countries, are treated fairly.
Okay, so things like fair wages, safe working conditions.
Absolutely. They also focus on things like community development and environmental sustainability.
It sounds like a really comprehensive approach to ethical sourcing.
It is, and there are a lot of different fair trade certifications out there, each with its own specific set of standards.
The Sustainable Agency article also listed the World Fair Trade Organization, or WFTO, and SA 8000 as well.
Yeah, WFTO is unique in that they certify entire businesses, not just specific products.
Oh, so it's like a company-wide commitment to fair trade principles.
Exactly. And SA 8000 is specifically focused on labor practices like prohibiting child labor, forced labor, and ensuring safe and healthy working conditions.
But I remember reading about a pretty disturbing example in the article, something about a factory fire.
Yes, that was a tragic incident. It was a factory in Bangladesh that had SA 8000 certification.
And there was a fire.
Yes, and sadly several workers lost their lives.
Despite having this certification for safe working conditions,
It just goes to show that certifications, while valuable, aren't foolproof.
yeah, it's a sobering reminder that even with these standards in place, things can still go wrong.
Absolutely. It highlights the need for constant vigilance and improvement.
Okay, what about packaging? The Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC, and the compostability label were mentioned.
Yeah, packaging is a big part of sustainability too.
So what's FSC all about?
The FSC is all about responsible forest management.
Okay, so ensuring that wood and paper products come from sustainably managed forests.
Exactly. They have standards to prevent deforestation, protect biodiversity, and respect the rights of indigenous communities.
It's like a way to make sure your paper products aren't contributing to deforestation.
Exactly. Look for the FSC logo on paper products, packaging, even furniture.
And what about the compostability label? What does that signify?
The compostability label, especially the one issued by European Bioplastics, clarifies whether a material is truly compostable.
Okay, so not just biodegradable.
Right. Biodegradable just means that a material will eventually break down naturally, but it doesn't tell you how long it will take or under what conditions.
Right.
Compostable means that a material can break down in a specific time frame and under specific conditions, usually in a composting facility.
And that results in compost that can be used to enrich soil.
Exactly. It's like closing the loop on organic waste.
So biodegradable is not the same as compostable.
No, it's important to distinguish between the two.
Got it. Now, the article also listed a whole bunch of certifications for other industries like IT, building, and even tourism.
Yeah, sustainability is becoming relevant in just about every sector.
So it seems like each industry is developing its own set of standards and certifications.
Exactly. Like TCO certified for IT products focuses on responsible manufacturing, energy efficiency, and end-of-life management for electronics.
Okay.
And in building and design, you have certifications like LEED, WELL, and EDGE, which assess the environmental performance of.
And for tourism, there are certifications like EarthCheck, Green Key, and Green Globe, which promote sustainable practices in hotels, tour operators, and other tourism businesses.
Yeah, it just shows how the concept of sustainability is spreading to every corner of the world.
Absolutely. Now, that list of general other certifications in the article,
Oh yeah, that was a long
it
one.
was like a grab bag of different things.
It was, but there were some really important ones in there.
Like,
Well, ISO 14001 is a big one. It's a framework for environmental management systems.
okay, so it helps organizations manage their environmental impact more effectively.
Exactly.
And what about the EU Eco Label?
The EU Ecolabel focuses on the entire life cycle of a product, from raw materials to disposal.
So it's a very comprehensive approach.
It is.
And then there's B Corp, which we've heard a lot about lately.
Yeah, B Corp is really interesting. They certify businesses that meet high standards of social and environmental performance, accountability, and transparency.
So it's about using business as a force for good.
Exactly. They're trying to redefine what it means to be a successful business.
Now, Rainforest Alliance, they're all about protecting forests, right?
Yeah, their focus is on conserving biodiversity, promoting sustainable agriculture, and improving the livelihoods of farmers and forest communities.
But they've also faced some criticism.
Yeah, there have been questions about their effectiveness in certain areas.
So, another reminder to always do your research and not just take a label at face value.
Absolutely. It's important to look beyond the logo.
Now, cradle to cradle certified, that was another interesting one.
Yeah, Cradle to Cradle is all about circularity, designing products that can be safe. ISCC, or International Sustainability and Carbon Certification, is a system for certifying sustainable feedstocks and products.
Okay.
And they have a bunch of different schemes like ISCC EU and ISCC PLOS, which are specific to biofuels and bio-based materials.
So they're trying to ensure that the raw materials used in various industries are sourced sustainably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And ETHI is a newer certification that uses hexagonal eco-labels to communicate different aspects of a product's sustainability performance.
Interesting. So they're trying to make it easier for consumers to understand sustainability information.
Exactly. It's all about transparency and clear communication.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about certifications,
We have.
but let's get into the actual textiles themselves.
Okay, let's do it.
Because the Fabric Innovations 2025 report made it clear that the fashion industry has a huge environmental footprint.
Yeah, it's a major problem.
CO2 emissions, water usage, especially with conventional cotton.
It's a resource-intensive industry for sure.
So where are the innovations happening? Where are the glimmers of hope?
Well, the report highlighted a few really promising areas.
Okay.
One of the biggest trends is the shift towards bio-based and recycled materials.
Okay, so moving away from conventional cotton and virgin petroleum-based synthetics.
Exactly. We're seeing more and more fabrics made from things like sustainably sourced wood pulp, algae, even mushrooms.
Wow, mushrooms.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what they can do with mycelium, the root structure of mushrooms.
That's wild.
And big brands are starting to embrace these materials too.
Like who?
Well, Stella McCartney has been a pioneer in sustainable fashion for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Adidas is incorporating recycled materials into their shoes and clothing.
Right.
And Patagonia is known for their commitment to using recycled and organic materials.
So the big players are starting to take notice.
They are. And the report predicts that the market for recycled textiles is going to grow significantly in the coming years.
That's great news. So more sustainable options are becoming available.
Yeah, and hopefully more affordable too.
What about the performance of these new materials? I mean, can they really compete with conventional fabrics?
That's a good question.
Hmm?
And the report actually highlighted some really exciting innovations in that area too.
Like a
Well, they talked about smart textiles.
smart textile.
Yeah, these are fabrics that have technology integrated into them, like sensors and conductive yarns.
So like clothes that can monitor your heart rate or track your activity.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just fitness tracking.
How so?
Smart textiles can also respond to changes in temperature, light, or even pressure.
So clothes that can adjust their ventilation or provide support where you need it.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And while there are some environmental concerns about the production of these technologies, the report argues that they have the potential to contribute to sustainability in the long run.
Interesting. How so?
Well, for example, clothes that can monitor your sweat levels could help reduce the frequency of washing, which would save water and energy.
That makes sense.
And clothes that can adjust their ventilation could help reduce the need for heating or cooling, which would save energy as well.
Okay, so smart textiles could lead to more efficient use of resources.
Exactly. It's about using technology to make our clothes work smarter, not harder.
Now, the report also talked about high-performance fabrics.
Right.
What are those?
These are fabrics that are designed to be extremely durable, long-lasting, and often have special properties like water resistance or stain resistance.
Okay, so things like Kevlar, Gore-Tex, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And the report highlighted that these types of fabrics can actually contribute to sustainability.
How so?
Well, by making clothes that last longer, you reduce the need to replace them as often, which means less waste and less resource consumption overall.
That makes sense. If you're not constantly buying new clothes, you're reducing your environmental impact.
Right. It's about investing in quality pieces that will last for years, rather than buying cheap, disposable fast fashion.
Now, what about those more futuristic ideas? The report briefly mentioned AI-powered design, 3D printing, even biofabricated materials.
Yeah, those are some really exciting possibilities on the horizon.
It seems like science fiction, but it's actually happening.
It is. AI-powered design is already being used by some brands to better predict trends and consumer demand,
Okay.
which can help reduce overproduction and waste.
And 3D printing.
3D printing could revolutionize manufacturing by allowing for on-demand production, so you only make what you need when you need it.
Which would minimize waste.
Exactly. And biofabricated materials, where you're essentially growing fabrics from living organisms like cells or lab-grown fibers.
Wow, that sounds crazy.
It is, but it's a really promising area of research.
So the future of textiles could be very different from what we see today.
Absolutely. There's a lot of potential for innovation and disruption in this industry.
Okay, so we've talked about certifications, we've talked about new materials.
Right.
Now let's talk about how we actually assess the sustainability of a textile.
Yeah, good point.
And the literature review you send over on life cycle assessment, or LCA, seems like a good place to start.
Absolutely. LCA is a really important tool for understanding the environmental impacts of a product throughout its entire life cycle.
Okay, so from raw materials to disposal.
Exactly. From cradle to grave, as they say.
But the review also highlighted some pretty significant challenges with using LCA, especially in the textile industry.
Yeah, it's not a perfect system.
So what are some of the biggest hurdles?
Well, one of the biggest issues is data quality.
Data quality.
Yeah, LCA relies heavily on having accurate and complete data about every stage of a product's life cycle.
Okay.
But in the textile industry, supply chains are often very complex and opaque.
Uh-huh.
So it can be really difficult to get all the information you need.
So if the data isn't good, the results of the LCA won't be reliable.
Exactly. And even if you have good data, there are still methodological challenges. Like,
Ah.
well, one of the trickiest things is allocation.
Uh,
Yeah. It's about how you assign the environmental impacts of a process when there are multiple inputs or outputs.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you're growing cotton.
Mm-hmm.
You get the cotton fibers that are used for textiles, but you also get cotton seed, which can be used for other things.
Right.
So how do you divide the environmental impacts of growing that cotton between the fibers and the cotton seed?
That's a good question. It seems like it would be difficult to determine.
It is. And there are different methods for doing it, but there's no one universally agreed upon way.
So the results of the LCA can vary depending on how you handle allocation.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of regional variation.
Regional variation.
Yeah, the environmental impact of a product can vary depending on where it's produced and consumed.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure. A study might find that laundering has a big environmental impact for a polyester blouse in the U.S.
Okay.
But in a country like Sweden, where people tend to wash their clothes in colder water and line dry them more often,
Mhm.
the impact of laundering might be much lower.
So you can't necessarily generalize the results of an LCA from one region to another.
That's right. It's important to consider the specific context.
And then there's weighting.
Weighting, the subjective part of LCA.
So what's that about?
Well, when you're comparing different environmental impacts like climate change versus water pollution,
Yeah.
you have to decide how to weight them against each other.
So which one is more important?
Exactly. But there's no objective way to do that. It's based on values and priorities.
And those can vary from person to person, from culture to culture.
Absolutely. So weighting inevitably introduces some subjectivity into the LCA process.
It sounds like LCA is a valuable tool, but it's not without its limitations.
That's a good way to put it. It's a way to get a more holistic understanding of environmental impacts, but it's not a magic bullet.
Now, the review also mentions some specific environmental impacts from the textile industry that aren't always fully considered in LCA.
Right. Things like the huge amounts of water used to irrigate cotton crops,
Yeah, that's a major problem.
and the heavy use of pesticides in conventional cotton farming.
Which can have really harmful effects on ecosystems and human health.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there are the persistent chemicals used in wet processing, like dyeing and finishing.
So the environmental footprint of the textile industry is bigger than just carbon emissions.
It is. It's a complex issue with many different facets.
Okay, now let's shift gears a bit and look at what consumers are saying about sustainable textiles.
Sounds good.
You shared a really interesting Reddit thread from Our Sustainable Fashion.
Yeah, that was a great discussion.
So what were some of the key takeaways?
Well, it was clear that consumers are becoming more aware of the environmental impact of their clothing choices.
That's encouraging.
And there was a general consensus that certain fabrics are better than others.
Like,
Well, recycled cotton, organic cotton, linen, hemp, tencel, those were all seen as more eco-friendly options.
okay, and on the flip side,
Virgin petroleum-based synthetics were definitely seen as a no-no.
Uh.
And there were concerns about the environmental impact of rayon, modal, and viscose. even though they're often marketed as being more sustainable.
Right, because of the chemical processing involved.
Exactly.
And there was a really interesting discussion about microplastics from synthetic swimwear.
Yeah, that's a big concern.
And it seems like some brands are starting to offer more sustainable swimwear
That's
options.
just great to see.
Overall, it seems like consumers are getting smarter about
Yeah,
textiles.
they're asking more questions and demanding more transparency.
Now, what about the industry perspective? You also shared an article from Redress called Sustainability in Fibers.
That was a good one.
What were their main points?
Well, they made it clear that there's no one perfect fiber when it comes to sustainability.
It's about making informed choices, considering the whole life cycle of a garment.
Exactly. And they talked about the shift from a linear take, make, dispose model to a more circular model.
Right, where materials are reused and recycled.
Exactly. And fibers are a key part of that transition.
So, what did they say about conventional cotton and polyester?
Well, for conventional cotton, they highlighted the huge amounts of water and pesticides used in its production
Yeah, that's a major drawback.
and the energy-intensive nature of yarn production.
Right.
And while cotton is biodegradable, only a tiny fraction of it is actually recycled.
Okay, what about polyester?
Polyester is made from petroleum, so it's a non-renewable resource.
Uh,
And the production process is energy intensive and can involve harmful chemicals.
right.
And of course, there's the problem of microplastic shedding during washing.
Yeah, that's a big one.
But on the plus side, polyester is recyclable, although the rates of recycling are still low.
Okay, and the article also mentioned the challenges of recycling blended yarns
Yeah, that's a big problem.
because different fibers have to be separated before they can be recycled.
Right, and the technology for doing that effectively is still under development.
So, a lot of blended textiles end up in landfills.
Unfortunately, yes.
So, what are some of the solutions?
Well, the article highlighted the importance of using recycled fibers whenever possible
Okay.
and exploring new, more sustainable materials like Pinatex, Milo, and Microsilk.
Those all sound really interesting.
They are, and prioritizing fibers that are certified by credible organizations.
Like GOTS or SSC.
Exactly. And paying attention to the manufacturing processes themselves.
So, things like using less water and energy, fewer harmful chemicals.
Right. And the article also emphasized the role of consumers in promoting circularity.
So, things like taking good care of our clothes, repairing them when needed, and reselling or donating them when we're done with them.
Absolutely. And supporting brands that offer take-back programs and work with resale platforms.
It seems like creating a sustainable textile industry is a team effort.
It is. It requires collaboration and innovation across the entire value chain.
Okay, finally, let's talk about the big picture, the systemic impacts of textile production.
Yeah, that's where things get really serious.
You shared some reports from Unit P and the European Parliament, and they painted a pretty grim picture.
They did. The textile industry is a major contributor to climate change, water scarcity, and pollution.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking when you see the numbers.
It is. And the European Parliament has been really vocal about the need for more sustainable practices.
They're pushing for stricter regulations, right?
Yeah, like the revised EU Waste Directive, which introduces extended producer responsibility for textiles.
So brands will be responsible for what happens to their products at the end of their life.
Exactly. And they'll be required to finance the collection, sorting, and recycling of textile waste.
So it's a big shift in responsibility.
It is. And hopefully it will lead to more sustainable practices throughout the industry.
So after this deep dive into the world of sustainable textiles, what's the main takeaway?
Well, it's clear that there's no easy answer.
It's a complex issue with a lot of different factors to consider.
Exactly. But the good news is that there's a lot of innovation happening.
Yeah, new materials, new technologies, new ways of thinking about the whole life cycle of a garment.
And consumers are becoming more aware and more demanding.
Which is putting pressure on brands to step up their game.
Absolutely. So I think there's reason to be hopeful.
Yeah, I agree. It's a challenging journey, but it's a necessary one.
Definitely. And it's one that we all need.